Welcome to the Hidden Factor in Relationship Disharmony. I'm Marnia Robinson. I'm the author of a book called Cupid's Poisoned Arrow, From Habit to Harmony in Sexual Relationships. I was in 4 weddings, as a bride or a bridesmaid. All of us were children of parents who stayed married until death parted them. Yet all of our marriages ended in divorce, and 3 of us have remarried. I wanted to know what was at the bottom of this phenomenon. Exactly why were unions becoming so fragile? Intimate relationships are potentially an enormous source of well-being and even healing. Close, trusted companionship can reduce stress, make wounds heal faster, and even help AIDS patients live longer. Unfortunately, biology has programmed us so that, on average, our romances tend to deteriorate over time, and sometimes very rapidly. In fact, those couples who are natural swans are so rare that researchers refer to them as outliers, or exceptions to the rule. So what is the rule? Studies reveal that after a brief honeymoon period, mates typically find each other more irritating as a marriage continues, for as long as it lasts. Mysteriously, this phenomenon doesn't affect relationships with relatives, pets, or friends. What is different about romantic relationships? Now, tension in intimate relationships can obviously come from many factors, such as money management differences, childhood trauma, or personal eccentricities. But there is also a hidden biological factor that magnifies them all. It shows up as an uneasy, often subconscious, feeling of irritation, which makes any other challenges more difficult to resolve. And wild as it may seem, this factor could just be the common denominator in behaviors that seem quite unrelated, such as bickering, insensitivity, oversensitivity, infidelity, and sexless marriages. It turns out that this factor has been present in our genetic programming for many millions of years. It's just becoming more obvious now for reasons I'll mention later. In the course of my investigation, I also learned a lot about how to counter this hidden factor, so I'll share that with you too as we go along. Have you ever fallen madly in love, experienced great sex, been sure that you both wanted to stay together forever, and then noticed recurring emotional friction boiling up between you and your beloved? Maybe you have a sense that the honeymoon is over. Perhaps one of you often becomes clingy and demanding while the other feels devoured and needs space. Or maybe you have screaming fights followed by passionate reconciliations. All of these are familiar symptoms of a subconscious alienation, which mates often encounter despite their sincere desire to remain committed and in love. I think of it as the unsuspected poison on Cupid's arrow. It's unsuspected because it's innate. It's a biological program common to all mammals. And if we don't do something to steer around it consciously, it's as automatic as, say, blinking, or the adrenaline rush you get when you're startled, or an allergic reaction to cat dander. As I began digging around to understand why relationships are so fragile, I discovered that the existence of this hidden program and a way to get around the trouble it causes have both been discovered repeatedly in many cultures at various times over thousands of years. But these key insights are usually quickly buried because our mating program is so powerful and so subconscious. Now, however, with the help of modern brain science and evolutionary biology theory, we can look at relationships through a new lens. For me, clues from various professions made the challenge, as well as our options, much clearer. These insights also suggest why humans have been wrestling with the issue of improving harmony in their relationships for a very long time. The fact is, we have 2 conflicting biological programs at work in our love lives. I think of one of them as our mating program, and the other as our bonding program. Let's look at the mating program first. We are mammals, and the typical mammalian mating program looks a lot like this. Start by pursuing a mate or seducing a mate with tremendous drive. Mate furiously. In fact, in some species, vigorous mating helps prepare the female for pregnancy. Then, after repeated copulations, when sexual desire is exhausted, move on to a novel partner. It's worth noting that mammals have no clear idea why they move on when they do. This subconscious program simply makes the former mate look like boiled cabbage, and an unfamiliar potential mate often look like a box of delicious chocolate truffles, at least for a while. How does this program manipulate us so powerfully? It uses changes in neurochemicals in a primitive part of the brain that you're looking at right there, old brain. And this part of the brain operates pretty much the same way in all mammals, uses those same neurochemicals. Now, because of these powerful neurochemicals, pursuing a mate feels great. So does orgasm, because it's the chance to pass on your genes, so you're strongly programmed to engage in these behaviors. If orgasm were the end of the story, lovers would be able to do what comes naturally in the bedroom and live happily ever after. The problem is that sex, and especially the kind with lots of orgasms all around, leading to that feeling of I'm definitely done, isn't an isolated event. In fact, orgasm is the peak of a much longer cycle of subsequent changes deep in this part of the brain, and they can continue for up to 2 weeks. It is these lingering effects that poison our relationship, and we never suspect what really causes it. In some of us, this poison takes effect so rapidly that our romance lasts only for a night. However, as we'll see in a moment, humans are pair bonding mammals. So usually we experience a period of relative relationship bliss, which is supported by a short-lived love potion of brain chemicals designed to keep us together for a while. Once this love potion wears off, our mate can begin to remind us of a top 40s hit we've heard a few too many times. As we grow disillusioned because of this mating program that causes habituation, we're motivated to do just what biology wants us to do. Merge our genes with a new partner, who always looks more exciting than the last one or the current one. Adding a novel partner, or many novel partners as the woman you see there, means another genetic opportunity. This improves the chances that our genes will sail into the future on more than one boat. Of course, we may choose to resist temptation, but that doesn't keep this program from making us resentful and irritable, or wondering if we married the wrong person, or whether we'd feel much better with someone else. And of course, the chances are we would for a while because of the effects of this program. In other words, both the sweet and sour phases of romance improve the chances that our genes will make it into the next generation, even if we are left cynical or brokenhearted. Our genetic mating program is working brilliantly. It just doesn't have our best interest at heart. The powerful drive toward orgasm plays 2 critical roles in our mating program. Fertilization, that one we've always known about, that's pretty obvious, and habituation. Believe it or not, you are now looking at the heart of Cupid's poison, the passion cycle. Because although orgasm feels like it happens only in your genitals, you wouldn't feel the climax itself without specific neurochemical events between your ears. In fact, scientists have triggered orgasms with electrodes in the brain and in the spine without touching any genitals. Now, instead of an electrode, your body uses a spike of neurochemicals in that old part of the brain we saw earlier. That's what triggers the sensation of orgasm. And you can see it pictured there on the left side of the screen. What goes up at the moment of orgasm must come down. Unfortunately, it doesn't just return to equilibrium right away. And that's why you have that rocky-looking recovery cycle on the right side of the screen. Although scientists aren't generally acknowledging that there is a post-orgasmic recovery period, evidence of it has already been unearthed by researchers eager to develop sexual enhancement drugs. Strange as it seems, their research suggests that this passion cycle takes about 2 weeks to return to pre-orgasm balance. During this recovery phase, lovers may feel uncharacteristically needy, irritable, anxious, depleted, or desperate for another orgasm, because that will instantly relieve all those other symptoms. Of course, it will also put you back at the beginning of the cycle, and you'll have to go through the whole thing again. You can think of this recovery period as a mild drug withdrawal period, because neurochemically it has some similarities. However, lovers don't realize that they're temporarily off balance during this recovery period. In fact, if they feel cranky, they usually think their partner is the cause of their crankiness. And that's because these feelings, which are subconscious usually, don't seem to be connected to anything that we've done ourselves, and so they get projected outward onto those around us, and they seem to be the ones annoying us. This poison is a recurring trigger for disharmony and compulsive behavior, as we'll see later, and it is built right into our romantic relationships. That is what makes sexual relationships different from other relationships. Of course, this uncomfortable recovery phase is nearly invisible to sexually active adults. It certainly was to me and my husband, until we began paying attention. For one thing, our mating neurochemistry fools us into believing that all our problems are due to needing more orgasm. And many of us, especially any of us who are not getting enough sex or intimacy, seldom look further for an explanation of our distress. In fact, even after we find a lover and can have as much sex as we want to, we still try to resolve our post-orgasmic uneasiness with more orgasm. And of course, if a partner isn't enthusiastic, there's always the internet. Unfortunately, more orgasm just pushes us further towards sexual satiety and uncomfortable withdrawal and habituation. You have to hand it to those genes of ours. It's an efficient way of making sure we engage in as much fertilization-driven sex as possible before we lose our desire to remain sexually exclusive with a particular mate. The bottom line is that the mating program driving our sexual appetite is doing two things we don't usually acknowledge or even realize. It pushes us toward habituation, and it gives us a boost whenever we pursue a novel partner, even a two-dimensional one, because you'll start to feel that rise when you look at a novel partner that you see on the left side of the screen, and instantly you'll feel better. So it feels like you're on the right track. This can create enormous inner conflict if you're trying to stay in love with someone. All of this means that the current emphasis on fixing marital dissatisfaction by making partners more orgasmic may actually increase the emotional friction between them over time. There's also the risk that someone will be made to feel there's something wrong with them if they don't orgasm easily, when they could just be ahead of the rest of us in longing for a more soothing kind of satisfaction. Sure, an orgasm feels great in the short run. No argument there. In fact, it feels like the solution to all of your problems, even problems you didn't know you had. But if it sets off 2 weeks of mysterious mood swings in both partners that distort their perception of each other, then it's not helping to keep them in love. It's just speeding their natural tendency to get fed up with each other. The confusing part is that intimacy itself, which includes not only intercourse but other kinds of activities, is powerful relationship glue. So intercourse itself is great. It's sexual satiety, that feeling of I'm done, that's the trigger for habituation. Intimacy is actually the key to the other mammalian program that heavily influences our romances. That would be our bonding program. It's the one that makes us want to walk down the aisle in the first place, and we're going to look at it next. Pair bonding is unique to a mere handful of mammals, including humans. We pair bonders evolved to get a buzz not just from sex, but also from romantic companionship. The other 97% of mammal species are happily promiscuous. Romeo and Juliet would be no more interesting to them than a display of antique farm tools. They don't need to pair up because Mom and her mammaries can handle the relatively brief parenting needed to launch offspring into adulthood. So why do some mammals pair bond? Because their infants survive better with two caregivers. We humans, for example, do better with two because our skulls are so big that we have to be born prematurely. We're far more helpless than most mammals at birth, even other primates, and we stay that way for a long time. We need our parents to fall in love, at least for long enough for them both to fall in love with us. That way, Dad will be more likely to help raise us too. The mammalian bonding program didn't initially evolve to make possible Romeo and Juliet scenarios. It evolved to bond infants with their caregivers. The rare mammals like us who pair bond with their mates adapted this underlying bonding program to help team up for a while. This is important information because it works on the same signals that infant caregiver bonds do. So in human mates, these signals would look like activities such as gazing into each other's eyes, hugging, kissing, nurturing touch, generous pampering, and wordless sounds of delight, just to name a few. They may sound like foreplay, but they're not as effective as bonding behaviors when you use them to push toward a goal. However, when you use them simply to make the other person feel loved, they are soothing to both giver and receiver. They also relax our natural defensiveness. That's what makes it possible for us to bond. Lovers who try them find they make each other look more and more adorable too, at least in their eyes. These bonding behaviors are also good for us. Because of the neurochemical rewards we get from generous touch and close, trusted companionship, we actually live longer, healthier, more relaxed lives when in relationship, provided it's harmonious. And that's true even if we don't have kids. As you can probably see, conscious use of these bonding cues provides a strategy to help counter our mating program. These bonding behaviors are a bit tricky. They only work when you use them almost daily, at least for a few minutes. That's all it takes. This is also true for infant caregiver bonds, so hug your kids. Now, the tension between our mating and bonding programs serves our genes, so it's always going to be with us. This means that when we exhaust our sexual desire for each other, we can easily undervalue our mates. Often, one thing that happens is that we drift away from these bonding behaviors and feel less satisfied and more restless as a result. Just know that when you don't feel like snuggling each other, you are actually sending each other a subconscious signal, emotional bond weakening. In fact, you can start to feel like you're falling out of love simply because you're drifting away from these critical bonding behaviors. Sadly, we don't realize that. Instead, we trust our instincts. We may assume that the problem is that we have fallen out of love or that we didn't find the right person to begin with. We never suspect the real culprit because exhausting ourselves sexually feels like such a great idea that there's no way it could be part of the problem, right? Even now, I'm sure you're thinking that your last relationship just ended because it was with the wrong person. Consider this. A few years back, Dr. Kikolt Glaser set out to discover whether stress hormones rose during marital conflict. To isolate short-term stress, she chose 90 newlywed couples out of a whopping 2,200 newlywed couples that she and her staff interviewed, because they didn't want to try to measure the stress of long-term stress that builds up in a marriage, so they decided to take only the most blissful, healthiest, wealthiest, most stable newlywed couples and have them argue. She discovered that conflict indeed does raise stress hormones, with possible implications for lowered immunity to disease. However, in following up with these couples, she also discovered that across the board, they reported decreased satisfaction in their marriages by the second year. As she put it, declines in marital satisfaction appeared to be a stable response to the first year or two of marriage. That is scientists speak for the poison on Cupid's arrow had taken effect. In other words, habituation had set in. And by release of the study, a fifth of her blissful, ideally suited couples had already divorced. In other words, it could be how, not who, that is the most important factor in preserving happy unions. The good news is that by learning how to work with our mating and bonding programs, we can steer for better results. The ancient Chinese Taoists were among those who found a solution to the habituation problem. They discovered that there are two different ways to make love. Each has a different goal and different effects. Fertilization-driven sex is for procreation. Orgasm launches sperm to meet egg. This same drive also urges us to exhaust our sexual desire for a mate. Eventually, it says to our subconscious, hey, you're done and it's time to go fertilize someone else. Gradually, a mate begins to look kind of like cold pizza you've already had too many slices of. The other way to make love is bonding-based sex. Its primary objectives are harmony and well-being. And it sends your subconscious a very different message. Hey, sticking around with this lover feels better and better. How did he or she get even cuter? Both methods entail intercourse to ease sexual tension effectively. Fertilization-driven sex achieves this goal with that neurochemical crash we looked at earlier, followed by a surprisingly slow return to homeostasis, that is, back to pre-orgasm balance. In contrast, bonding-based sex eases sexual tension using gentle intercourse mingled with deep relaxation and lots of soothing affection. Instead of heating you up to orgasm, it leads to warm feelings of satisfaction and lingering well-being. Now, I know that sounds impossible. It did to me too. To believe what I'm saying, you'd have to try it for a few weeks. This, of course, is one experiment your brain is set up not to find appealing. But ask yourself, based on what you've just learned, is passion really the strongest glue we have in our romances? I know a lot of experts are spending a lot of time and pharmaceutical dollars trying to heat up sex lives, particularly women's sex lives, because they believe it will help couples find sexual contentment. Now, on the surface, their strategy looks sound. After all, research confirms that as a partnership increases in duration, sexual desire typically declines in women, while desire for tenderness typically declines in men. However, as I said earlier, it may be that exhausting our sexual desire is what inflames our urge to want a new mate, even if some of us feel hornier during that time of irritability and some of us just feel turned off by the pressure to have more sex. If I'm right about this, then getting women in the mood won't solve the problem of disharmony. In fact, it's my suspicion that if scientists succeed in artificially creating this voracious female sexual appetite they're trying to create, men will be more likely to show symptoms of disinterest. Consider this. When male monkeys were paired repeatedly with the same females who were always in the mood because they were getting daily hormone injections, the males copulated less and less frequently, and with declining enthusiasm, over a 3.5-year period. Yet these slackers immediately changed their ways when novel females showed up. Passion is not glue. It's motivation. And it's often the very motivation that causes us to assume the risks and heartache of moving on to a novel partner. Passion won't help us stay together. What we really need is a way to make love that does two things. One, keeps couples from exhausting their sexual desire for each other, while still easing their sexual frustration. And two, keeps couples desiring to engage in those bonding behaviors, which are the real glue in relationships. The fascinating thing is that different traditions have actually discovered the same fundamental solution that meets those two criteria. There is a way to make love so that you get the benefits of union without tripping the habituation switch. And some of them are noted on this slide. The Gnostic Christians stumbled upon something they called the Sacrament of the Bridal Chamber, which seems to be based on these principles. The courtly love tradition 1,000 years later in the south of France. The Chinese Taoists in China for thousands of years have known it. Now, the version of what I call bonding-based sex that I find the most accessible, simply because the texts about it are more modern, is called Karezza. Karezza, from the Italian word for caress, is a term coined almost a century ago by a Quaker doctor in the United States. In Karezza, intercourse is very affectionate and calm. Both partners avoid orgasm. Here's how James Powell described this approach to lovemaking in his book, Energy and Eros. The technique is not based on control. During intercourse, you are not seeking to avoid orgasm or manipulate your bodily energies. You are merely closing your eyes, feeling those energies stream into your heart, head, and genitals, and those of your lover, and allowing them to circulate. You are always relaxing, falling back into the heart. As this takes place, the need for conventional orgasm will lessen. Now, learning Karezza can be fun, but you both have to be willing to try it and very clear about why you want to try something so unfamiliar. You also need several weeks to see the benefits of it. And you will need a sense of exploration. You will probably learn the most about Karezza from the times you derail and slip back into fertilization-driven sex. You definitely will do a lot of giggling. Here's what one young man wrote about the experience. My girlfriend and I have been trying non-orgasmic sex with screw-ups for maybe 4 months now. We are both in our mid-20s and have been together for about 6 months. We started our relationship really slowly. We would hold eye contact for hours, literally, and gently touch and stroke one another on the arms or the belly. Or we would touch our feet together under the table if other people were around. Things progressed, and we started to kiss, and there was more stroking and touching while lying down in bed. Every afternoon we would rush off after work to be together for a few hours. I didn't realize it then, but we were pretty much doing some of the exchanges. Now, as an aside, the exchanges are a series of 21 playful, affectionate activities for couples who want a structured way to transition toward Karezza, and they are in the back of the book, Cupid's Poisoned Arrow. Long story short, we've had some wonderful experiences, and I've gotten better at making love this way as I've been developing some guidelines. I'm now finding it easier to say no thanks to my animal thoughts, even when I have a naked and horny female provoking me. Here are the rules I have for myself. I know how obvious some of these appear, but it's so easy for the animal brain to kick in and for the rational mind to lazily accept what the animal one is doing. These rules give me clear lines. 1. Start with the scissors position. I couldn't believe it took us so long to try the scissors position. Months of frustration and struggling to find the perfect position where we can both be relaxed and I can be deep enough. And it was there in the book the whole time. It's important for me to keep still in the first minutes, and having to support my weight with my arms in missionary does not help at all. I highly recommend the scissors position. Compared to traditional positions like missionary, it also kind of discourages you from movement. You can be completely relaxed, which really helped me with controlling orgasm. 2. No deep thrusts. Let me say that again. No deep thrusts. It's so easy for the animal brain to take over. Sometimes there's a genuine need to push in a bit further, but try to pause before you do this to ask yourself why you want to do it. If it's just for the nice feeling, forget it. Refocus on the stillness and remember that the goal is generosity, not trying to get the goodies. 3. No in and out movement, except maybe for initial entry and lubrication. This is another obvious one. But just keep in mind that things can quickly turn sour from just one moment of animal movement. No making love from behind. It's fun to try different positions, but for me, anything from behind is too risky. There's some trigger in my brain that goes crazy when taking from behind. Just don't go there. Seriously. No sexual thoughts to stimulate an erection. It's strange how long this behavior stayed with me. It's so obviously misguided, but if I lost my erection too soon, I would find myself trying to get it back again with sexual thoughts. This is another example of the animal mind wanting to please the partner. But you should just listen to your body and wait. The amount of sexual energy you have varies, and the erection will come and go. Don't force it. 6. Listen to your body. I have felt pressure to continue even when my body wants to stop. This comes down to the desire to please your partner sexually. But if your body wants to stop, tell your partner, and then maybe a few minutes later you can reconnect when you're both ready. If I continue for too long, there's a very clear change from harmonious stillness to horniness, and suddenly the animal brain will kick in again. You need to be very determined and remember that your partner will understand. Also, if your body isn't responding, whether you're male or female, just accept that now isn't the right time and wait. Be honest and tell your partner if you don't want to continue. Don't feel pressured. So those are my rules, and in the past few weeks, I've finally felt like progress is being made. Just using the scissors position at the start has helped tremendously. A typical lovemaking session for us is over 2 hours, sometimes longer. I'm convinced this is the better way to make love. Here are 2 more tips that I would add based on lots of experience. First, if you want to try Karezza, do exactly what that couple did. Start with lots of affectionate touch without intercourse. This shows you how satisfying and powerful bonding behaviors alone can be. And that way, when you add intercourse back in, it's like icing on the cake and not the whole cake. It's ideal if you give this relaxed, affectionate phase at least 2 weeks. That way, both partners can ideally get beyond any passion cycles. Second tip, schedule the nights you'll have intercourse. And engage in at least a few moments of bonding behaviors, even just holding each other in silence on the nights that you don't have intercourse. Now, scheduling sounds like a strange idea, I know. But I found out the hard way that if you don't agree on when you will have intercourse, whoever is feeling more sexually frustrated will rev up every time you get in bed and will feel extremely restless and incomplete if contact doesn't lead to intercourse. Now, you might think the solution would be to have intercourse every night, but actually it's not. The nights off, when you're just doing bonding behaviors, are very important. They allow you to relax and focus on non-goal-oriented, soothing affection. This calms your nervous system and reminds you of the power of those bonding behaviors. Scheduling also means that you can both look forward to the intercourse nights as something really special. To sum up this talk, if we do what we've always done, we'll get what we've always gotten. We're wired that way. Yet we can learn to steer for the results we want, whatever those may be, if we think of our mating and bonding programs as 2 separate pedals that drive our intimate relationships. I think of the mating program, the urge to exhaust ourselves sexually as thoroughly as possible, as the habituation pedal, because it so often causes partners to get fed up with or habituate to each other. The bonding program, on the other hand, is the harmony pedal, because it genuinely makes togetherness more appealing and deeply satisfying. Although bonding originated as a mechanism for bonding infant mammals to their caregivers, we're encoded to find these behaviors, such as skin-to-skin contact, exchanging smiles, and generous touch, pleasurable at any age. This is why we can use them strategically to strengthen our enthusiasm for lasting intimacy indefinitely, if that's a goal. We can also use Karezza to transform intercourse itself into a soothing, non-goal-oriented bonding behavior for use when procreation is not desired. Before closing, I'd like to add that obviously humanity's subconscious mating agenda is not a new challenge. But there are two developments that make it more urgent than ever to cultivate authentic harmony between couples. Our culture has changed. We have more freedom and more sexual stimulation. Until recently, across much of the globe, church and state kept a rein on sexual expression. Marriages were often arranged. Divorce was impossible and then heavily censored. Birth control was unavailable or prohibited. And adultery or sex before marriage were strictly punished. All these features of life ensured that any emotional separation between partners was partly masked by the fact that they had to continue to live together and raise their inevitable children. These circumstances also meant that there was just plain less fooling around after the honeymoon period, in most couples' lives at least. That left relationships often uncomfortably stagnant, but less volatile. Today's social and civil sanctions, in the West at least, can no longer hold mates in artificial bondage. Now that's fine, and some of us see it as a good thing. But it means that our underlying mammalian mating program is ripping couples and families apart with increasing efficiency. As we no longer live in tribes based on mutual support, this outcome is agonizing for all concerned. With each new generation, there are fewer and fewer couples who escape the misery of habituation. When researchers looked at marital happiness across generational groups, they discovered that the oldest couples were more likely to be somewhat happier. Analysts put this down to the fact that older couples married when people held more pragmatic views about marriage, and when support for marriage was stronger, and couples were more committed to the norm of lifelong marriage. However, there's another very potent but unacknowledged factor also at work today. We are guinea pigs in a massive international experiment. Today's overtly sexual media routinely evoke supernormal, that is above normal, sexual stimulation in our brains. And I'm not just talking about porn, but our ads, our clothing, our mainstream magazines, our TV shows. We don't think about it because it's so widespread. But an internet user, for example, can see more extreme erotica in an afternoon than his ancestors would have seen in a lifetime. And our brains may just not be equipped to handle this overload. Extreme erotic stimulation promotes orgasm, obviously. So porn can speed up the involuntary workings of that mating program we've been talking about by urging us to exhaust our sexual desire more rapidly than ever. As we'll see in a moment, this makes it increasingly difficult for a partner to meet our needs. So we tend to break up, move on, or we rely more and more heavily on two-dimensional mates. This deterioration in relationships increases distrust between the sexes. It can even promote despair about relationships in general and eventually unhealthy defensive isolation. But back to porn for a second. Superstimulation easily hijacks that old brain we saw pictured earlier. That part of the brain can't reason. It just knows how to pursue what feels good in the short term. Remember that passion cycle chart we looked at? Each orgasmic crash pushes the porn user, to seek the relief of clicking to a new video and another orgasm. So the person can easily end up spinning around in a rapid passion cycle loop. Porn also plays on our novel mate programming because it offers an infinite array, in fact, of novel partners doing highly arousing things. In fact, all that exciting novelty in the form of porn registers as so potentially rewarding to that old part of the brain that our brain automatically lays down stronger and stronger pathways to focus more and more of our future attention on such stimulation. This is why our partners can't keep up with our increasing appetite. Our brains are very plastic, and when this happens, when those stronger pathways are laid down, we can become hypersensitive to anything sexual and subconsciously find ourselves scanning for it more than ever. It gets harder and harder to turn our attention away from those things toward things that would actually offer greater well-being and more satisfaction over the long haul. Now, again, recall that passion cycle chart with the highs and lows. What people also haven't realized about this kind of superstimulation is that the more intense the stimulation, the higher those neurochemical highs at the peak of the cycle, and the lower the lows afterward. So people can get caught bouncing up and down between neurochemical extremes in that same part of the brain. And neither one of those extremes is very comfortable. Eventually, too much superstimulation can actually desensitize that old part of the brain. And at that point, someone may need more and more intense stimulation to get any relief and find themselves looking at really wild things that they know don't even reflect their real tastes. Now, if you happen to be one of the people who innocently got caught in this kind of compulsive behavior and you're now noticing that you're using porn just to medicate the lows, you may want to take a look at a chapter called The Road to Excess in Cupid's Poisoned Arrow. No matter where our powerful subconscious mating program has pushed us, we're all fundamentally innocent. We, our exes, you, your exes, and all of our parents have just been doing what our genes have programmed us to do. That is, get bored, tired, or irritated, be disappointed with each other, often fool around, break up, and start it all again. We had no idea that orgasm is not mere pleasure or release, but that sexual satiety actually tends to cause us to devalue or alienate our mates over time. Avoiding sex obviously doesn't solve the problem because sexual frustration continues to build without resolution. On the other hand, pursuing orgasm nonstop to relieve that kind of tension poses its own hidden risks of habituation and compulsive behavior. If we want to explore Karezza to increase the stability and harmony in our intimate relationships, we have to address our current habits compassionately and creatively without blame. I'm convinced we can rise above our current challenges by using the bonding behaviors and Karezza. Moving beyond impulse toward conscious equilibrium in our sex lives tends to furnish a sense of inner wholeness. For example, my husband and I now feel way less susceptible to manipulation of any kind, whether by advertisers, politicians, or others. And you too may find that without the feelings of lack, uneasiness, and neediness that mysteriously show up after exhausting sexual desire, you simply aren't as vulnerable to temptations like junk food, reckless spending, or fear-based manipulation. According to one expert, humans experiencing companionate love feel calm and secure and experience social comfort and emotional union. Given the powerful psychological and health benefits of happy union, Karezza lovemaking or bonding-based sex may just be the ticket for pair-bonding mammals like us. Happy experimenting. Visit the Habit to Harmony forum to ask questions or let us know how you're getting on.